Welcome to another edition of Globespan 24x7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with our technical operator, Mr. Devin Bissoon. Tonight, we are discussing electoral reform in Guyana. Joining us tonight are three distinguished personalities, Guyanese personalities. Professor Bertram Ramrak of the State University System, Nassau Community College. We have Professor Terence Blackman of Medgar Evers of the CUNY, City University of New York System, and Mr. Ravindra Dev. All three of these gentlemen have appeared on this show before. I don't think any further introduction is necessary. Gentlemen, before we move into electoral reforms, dominating the news for the past several days, since Monday, is the rise to office of a non-Indian, a person of color, an Asian Indian, Mr. Rishi Sunak, who has become the leader of the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom, of all places, the United Kingdom, and the Conservative Party. Not very different from the Republican Party of the United States. It's almost unheard of, unimaginable that a person of color would become the leader of the Conservative Party, who has gone on to become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, England, for lack of a better term. I just want to indulge your analysis, commentary on the rise of this gentleman, 42 years old, Rishi Sunak, whose parents were originally from East Africa, and prior to that, their grandparents are from India. What do you make of that? First, anyone want to take? Professor Terence Blackman, what do you make of an Indian Brighton rising to become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
So let me begin by saying that in the year 2000, as I might have said on this program before, I spent a number of months in India, and following those months in India, I then flew to London, and it was my distinct sort of thought at that moment, now 20 years ago, that the fact that this small island ruled this large country called India was really said something about the power of the colonial enterprise, but it also said something about the power of the military and the importance of technology. And it also said something about culture that I wasn't quite clear about in my head. So in a way, I think it's a beautiful irony that Rishi Sunak comes to the leadership of England as a descendant of India. There is something particularly coming to this on the day that Indians around the world celebrate Diwali. I think that there's some delicious irony in this that speaks to some larger global karma. But having said that, I do think that this is a feature of Western democracies that I think, and democracies in general, liberal Western democracies, that I think we should appreciate. I think certainly that Sunak's ascendance is akin to the ascendance of Barack Obama in the context of the United States. I mean, the fact that he represents the conservative, the Tories, who in some sense reflect a kind of republic, or kind of equivalent of our Republicans, I think is important, but also not as critical as I think we would want to make it. I think that it says something about these Western societies in which they live, and the ability of individuals, whatever their racial or ethnic groups, origins, to rise to at least idealistically, and in the way we're constructed, to rise to positions of power. I think, it would almost be inconceivable for some white person to rise through the democratic process in India to the head of one of the major Indian political parties. So I do think it speaks very eloquently and clearly to the ideals of Western liberal democratic states, and it's something that we ought to all be very pleased about. And certainly I wish uh, Prime Minister Sunak well. I think that, he comes to power at a time when there are a number of really big challenges, but he's 42 years old, and so I think he's young, and I think he has the kind of energy. He served as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and so I think that he can do something. What will be interesting, I think, will be to view the response of the global Indian diaspora to Mr. Sunak as he leads what is, in a sense, the old colonial empire, and that will be interesting for me going forward, both externally and internally as a viewer.
Professor Ramrak?
Well, good evening to your guests and the audience out there. Well, some people may say this is karma. Some people may say this is a gift on Diwali. Some people may say, well, the chickens are coming home to roost, to borrow a phrase from Malcolm X. But, when you look at this event, I do have to say, as an Indian and as a Hindu, it is a tremendous achievement, and it brings a lot of pride and joy, right, to who we are as a people. Going back in time, we see a country called, Great Britain. Of course, the sun never, stopped shining on the British Empire, that control, 40 million people controlling a country of 400 million, right? You've got people, it brings back memory of people like Rudyard Kipling, that famous, poem, the white man's burden. Britain is going out to India, to Africa, to other parts of the world to civilize. They have devils and so on. That's the tradition, that you're looking at, because you want to connect the present to the past, right? We've got people like, Lord Macaulay, from England, who made an attempt, and he was pretty successful in what he did, tried to create, what people refer to as coconuts, meaning, Indians can be in India, but the goal was to revise their education system, change their customs, change their religion, change their tradition, so you could create a people who would now dislike, that tradition, that rich, tradition. So you're looking at 200 years, of British rule, first with the East India Company, and then the British Raj. So I think, saying that it may be karma, it may be a little bit of karma, it may be a little bit of, people coming home, to roost, and maybe a little bit about a Diwali gift. It is auspicious that this happened on this occasion where people are lighting up their homes. It does, as I said, bring a lot of joy to people. There's some lessons to be learned here. And I think one of the things we're seeing, which to me is a positive thing, is that Indians and Hindus especially, Sunak was a guy who grew up in an Indian family. He was a Hindu. He's not afraid to show that, especially at a time when you have a lot of, challenges that are in a sense trying to marginalize Hinduism, right? The old notion of, people worshiping idols and so on. And then there's that whole movement outside of India to limit, what the Prime Minister of India is doing. So I think it brings a sharp focus into who we are as a people. I think it brings the stage to the world stage, the whole idea that, India can accomplish things, and Indians themselves can play a major role in doing that. I do hope, with all this is what we call, the honeymoon phase. So hopefully he can make the connection that, okay, I am a leader of Great Britain, but I'm also an Indian, and hopefully we can see him expressing, because I think it's important for him to express, that Indianness, that Hindu background of his, because like I said, that is something that has to be projected. And Indians in the diaspora globally, has never really had an opportunity as we have now to really sit back and say, yeah, we wish this guy luck, and hopefully he will make us all proud. As the professor said, he does have some challenges, right? He has to unite the party that he's ahead of. You could see rumblings about, comments that people are making, where the stereotypes are coming up. Well, he's a Hindu leader. He's a wealthy person. He's of South Asian background. So all of those things, it has a certain level of stereotypical views of a person who has risen to this challenge. And of course, he has to deal with the high inflation. He has to deal with, creating a stable economy. But hopefully with this experience being, running the Ministry of Finance, that would have been a very good background for him to address some of the problems, that Britain and other places are dealing with. So it is a proud and joy for me, speaking as a Hindu, so I can make that connection with him. I see him going to temple. I see him lighting the diya. So those things are very, very crucial to me.
Mr. Dev?
Well, what new perspective can I offer to these ones put out by these two esteemed gentlemen? I'll go from the colonial one, because I've spoken often that while colonialism might have been finished and the sun has set on the British Empire, coloniality, the effects of colonialism still lingers very powerfully, especially through three axes, one being race, the other one being capitalism, and the third being culture. Those three are still operating with the hegemony that was imposed during colonialism and still there. And I think it comes to a confluence in Sunak. Sunak is out of India, but not directly out of India. His forebears were indentured to Kenya. People forgot that the British moved thousands of Indians into Kenya to build a railroad and later to be the lower rungs of the civil service, and in a sense created some of the very same divisions that we faced in Guyana in terms of playing off groups against each other. So Sunak's grandparents migrated to England not long after Idi Amin had expelled 72,000 Indians from Uganda. So the point is that he's a son or he's a descendant of immigrant from the British Empire. And I think when you, Vishnu, talked about the anomaly of him being a conservative, if you look at most immigrant groups, they are conservative in the original sense of the word, to conserve, because they left primarily as indentured. They was sort of a voluntary commitment to earn money, to acquire wealth, to get out of the system in which they were plunged in British India. And so to that sense, when they went to England, they adopted the values of most immigrants, just like the Indians or other immigrants in Guyana. They did the same thing. So if you look in America also, a lot of immigrants, they vote Republican. It might seem strange, but immigrants are, to a certain extent, they have the conservative values, and some of those values are reflected in the conservative parties. The problem is, to come back to that, what I talked about, the contradiction, these countries, both Britain and America, are now caught up with the contradictions of capitalism in its neoliberal form, where you had the great crash of 2008, where both England and America, who pioneered neoliberalism under Reagan and Thatcher, are now facing the brunt. America has its debt is a total of 70 trillion, 1/3 of the debt of the world. Britain's debt is second to that. I think they're about 23 trillion. So Sunak, as a conservative who pushed that kind of thinking of neoliberalism, the man is a graduate of Stanford and then Goldman Sachs. So he knows about this house of cards that capitalism has built on financialization of the economy, where their real production has plummeted and they're making money on money. So the chickens have come to roost there. So let's see what Sunak does. But to come back to it, I think he's eminently qualified to do the very best. And I hope and I wish him well. And let's see how far he can get Britain out of the travails. But yes, the chickens are coming home to roost. And there's a bit of Schadenfreude in me in looking at these countries, even pick a Sunak. Notice that it wasn't the Conservative Party that picked him. The Conservative leadership had already picked him, but the Conservative members out in the open, those 170,000 Conservatives out there, they rejected him purely on a racial line for trust. Now this was only up to the leadership, so they have made a decision in trying to, for their greater good, because they are all part of the system, they picked Sunak. So let us see if he'll be able to carry water in the basket with which he's been given.
So if I may make 2 points, both are not mine, I got it from others. No white man, as was pointed out, wanted the job because it's such a difficult job at this point in time to transform an economy that's almost on the brink. And anyone who touches it,
it's on the brink.
Okay, and anyone who fails to fix it is unlikely to win re-election. Election are due within 2 years, if not sooner. And the other point, the other point made is that the Conservatives wanted Brexit, which occurred, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and they wanted to keep out the immigrants. They wanted to keep out non-Indian and non-whites, and they ended up with Rishi Sunak as the man to steer the economy during Brexit, because Brexit is not even completed as yet. They still have to work out the arrangements with Ireland and Northern Ireland and so forth. So, any other points before we move on, gentlemen?
Vish, I think you're trying to discourage all those people who just get their visa to go directly to England. It's going to be tough.
Actually, a lot of Guyanese were looking forward to moving to England. I think they might have second thoughts now. The economy in such terrible shape. Any other points on that? Another event making the news is the recall or resignation of Mr. Chandas as High Commissioner to England. Anyone dare to comment on that?
Well, I'd like to compliment President Ali. As he explained yesterday, he was preoccupied with matters at the airport, where he was signing an agreement with the Import-Export Bank of Africa, along with Mia Mottley, and so he couldn't really deal with the situation that had been exposed over social media. But at night, as soon as he saw it, he made a decision, made his call to Charandas and sacked him, and he has to come home. And I think this is an extremely important signal that certain kinds of behavior will not be tolerated, because it's not just because he was an ambassador. It was because of how he engaged in it, his view towards women, what he expressed in such crude and lewd terms. And I really believe that it was a good move on President Irfan Ali's part, and I compliment him. And I hope that they will now use the same yardstick of behavior in terms of other individuals who act in a very similar manner, not only in terms of treating women in such a disparaging way, but in terms of the whole way of dealing with the other groups in our society. I'm really referring to race and racism.
Professor Ramrat?
Well, there are a couple of things, that strike me. I know this is something that's in the media. It's all over the internet. As they say, it's all over creation when it's on the internet. There are a couple of things here that I think, people need to really understand. And I do want to focus a little bit on the person itself, Charandas, right? But I do want to compliment President Ali for responding to this in an appropriate way. He took, swift action, as Mr. Dev is saying. Now, looking at some of the comments on Facebook, and I think some people have responded to me, so probably, I mean, we can look at this as a way of me responding to those comments. So I think one, there are a number of issues involved here. Now, obviously, we haven't heard from, Charandas from his side, obviously, and he's also got his place in history. He was part of a process that puts him in the history book with the no confidence motion, right? So a lot of I wouldn't say all Guyanese, a lot of Guyanese saw that as a very positive thing. So his place is secure. But like I said, there's a couple of issues involved here. And I think the first one, and I think this is really, that goes to the heart of the response from President Ali, is that it is a deeply disturbing violation of diplomatic norms, right? In the old days, you would have people at the UN, who would get involved in infraction and serious cases like raping and so on. But those things are in the past. I think the world has moved away from that. So it's very difficult, to get away with any kind of infraction. I do have to say that Mr. Charandas, I've seen him in Mandares out here in Queens. I know in Kanji, he puts on his kurta, his Indian outfit. He goes to Mandare. He's a great singer. But it nevertheless, this is a disturbing scene that we're seeing. So the second thing I think that is involved here, which at some point has to be addressed, and I think Mr. Dev referred to this, which is the whole issue of abuse of women, right? Whether the woman may have said something or done something, we live in a society where men do have tremendous power. And I think the response from him and the words, I mean, videos do not lie. It's right there in front of our eyes. I always tell my kids, you see something, you take out your phone and start videotaping. I think the third thing that's involved, based on what we can ascertain here, is the whole issue of being abusive to animals. And again, I'm going on the basis of what I saw in the media about the lady who was involved. Apparently, she's a professor. She's not, someone who's out of the ordinary, and she has been dealing with dogs. And if you've ever been to Delhi, you walk around in Delhi, there are stray dogs all over. I can tell you that for a fact, right? So that's a good thing she was doing. So that's a third issue. And I think the other issue that we're seeing here, which goes to the heart of who our diplomatic representatives are. Most of our diplomats are not trained. Like in the United States, you have to go to the Foreign Service, you take an exam and so on, right? Or there's a foreign language, you're going to be posted in a foreign country, you have to be able to do that. So our diplomats are not trained. So there is that whole issue of that training. Aside from the human relations issue, Charandas is a lawyer. Right? He doesn't have that background. He was rewarded for what he did and the position he took during the no confidence motion. And I think the third issue here, which brings us back to our home in Guyana, is this whole notion of, men are powerful, right? We can do whatever we have to do. So what I think, and this is my opinion, I think what we saw here playing out is a reflection of who we are in Guyana. And I can cite a number of cases, but one of them that does stand out, which has a very similar, connotation in terms of what happened here. There was a report in the Kaieteur News about a woman who was gun-butted by a person who was named Ossie Davis. I'm sorry, Ossie Davis is the person who was in the Spike Lee movie. Ossie Rogers, I believe his name is. And when the police came, when this event was reported to the police immediately said to the woman who was the victim here that, do you really want to press charges? Do you really want to go to court? So in a sense, they're trying to discourage a woman from doing that. Now, this is a person, Ossie Rogers. If I was a police officer and he was heading to the airport, I would have grabbed him and bring him back to the station before he boarded that airplane, because he has a record, according to the report in the newspaper, where he was accused of attacking a young woman. He was accused of having if not an altercation, some event involving his mother. I'm citing that case because what I'm saying and what I'm getting at here is that, and I don't want to say it's a Guyanese thing, it's a Guyanese culture, but we do live in a patriarchal society. And when you take the Charandas situation and you apply that to the, Ossie Rogers case, that scenario replicate itself many times over in Guyanese society. So I think it could possibly be a cultural problem. So I'm very pleased. I'm very glad that President Ali addressed it in the way he did. But I think we have to look at the other pieces of the puzzle if we as a people are going to be able to move forward. We have to talk about the issues that we're dealing with, these cultural things. When R.C. Rogers had that issue, again, it was reported that one of the things he said was, I am a big boy now. So whether he's a PPP activist or whether he's a AFC activist or a PNC activist, that is the same situation we saw playing out in that situation dealing with Sharon Das. And by the way, I think there was another issue involved because the woman did say that he seemed like he was drunk. So that is another serious issue, right? We've got suicide, we've got, rum drinking. This week in the Guyana newspaper, there were two separate incidents where a woman was a target, where men in two separate incidents set fire to two ladies. So that is the kind of society we're living in. And I'm going to end with this. I think President Ali had to address it because it's an event that is happening outside of Guyana, because the woman did file charges, right? And this would have blown up into an international incident. Guyana is no longer, the backwater country, that sits on top of South America. It is on the map. It is going to be an economic giant, and people are looking. So my simple point to this, and I'm going to end here, and I know this is a monologue. What I'm saying is this has to be addressed at the local level. And maybe there might be a light at the end of that tunnel when Mr. Charan Das Prasad returns to Guyana. Maybe he can go into the Manderas, he can go to public areas where people gather, and maybe he can talk about what he did. And I think that would be a very therapeutic thing for him to do. But I think we need to address some of the other issues. Again, aside from the diplomatic one we saw playing out here, we need to address the other issues that are plaguing Guyanese society. I know I've said a lot. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Professor Blackman?
Well, I think, there are a few comments to be made here. So I will speak just specifically to the question of what we saw. And I think this morning I came to the conclusion, and I shared with a number of folks, that really all Guyanese should insist that Ambassador Charan Das be recalled. His actions were an unacceptable representation of Guyana and Guyanese. And, this was a matter for the Guyanese government, given what we saw in that video. And what we saw in that video deemed him unfit to be our High Commissioner to India. And, I'm not going to address the training, but at this moment saying that I think President Ali acted appropriately in recalling Ambassador Charan Das. One of the other things that I would also say is that, as part of what happened during the sort of, when this video emerged, there also emerged a sort of statement from the foreign ministry, which said that somehow they had investigated this and, that these circumstances could not be substantiated. And I think that kind of behavior, and it appears that this thing, while action was taken swiftly, when it became public, it was clear that this was something that was from 2021. And it was clear that members of the Foreign Service had engaged in some kind of cover-up to say that this was not exactly what we saw. And I think that, to the extent that we cannot bring the level of honesty that is necessary across the board. So, I don't want to put it to anything else, simply to say that members of the Guyana Foreign Service had this video, I'm sure, in their possession. They investigated this matter and concluded that there was nothing there. So in a way, they have not served the government well. And I would ask that, these people actually be held to account in some way for that kind of action, so that it is clear that the next time someone who is further down the chain that they would elevate that to the situation where someone who has the authority to act has an opportunity to see that before they make the determination that there was nothing there. I mean, it's unacceptable that that was something that was done in 2021 and was actually, deemed as, that there was nothing there, that this complaint was unsubstantiated. And, I think anyone who sees that video recognizes that, that what has occurred there is outside of the bounds of what we expect from a high commissioner to any country, and would definitely agree with President Ali that Ambassador Charandas needed to be recalled. I won't speak to the larger cultural issues, but I think specifically to this, I think that was it's interesting in a way. It's interesting in a way that we are at Ambassador Charandas, because in some sense, some of our immediate issues go to the actions of Ambassador Charandas. And let me say this clearly for the record. My view is that Mr. Charandas' actions as it relates to the no confidence vote was not illegal, right? I mean, he acted contrary to the interests of his party, but he has a right to his conscience. So my criticism of Charandas has nothing to do with the question of the no confidence vote, which in a way has precipitated a number of the questions that we've been addressing. So I want to be very clear about that. Mr. Charandas was entitled to act on his conscience, and he did. And but I think the government and the people of Guyana are entitled to act as they have acted when the representation that was provided by Mr. Charandas as the Indian High Commissioner was clearly unfit in this context.
I just want to make 2 points on this. One, this video surfaced 14 months after the fact. I don't know why. Who was motivated to release it now, as opposed to?
No, but would they have had the video when they made the determination that was reflected in the letter that we saw circulated from the Foreign Service?
I don't know. I don't know if they had
discussion.
Yeah, we don't know. The memo from the Foreign Service made reference to the Indian government conducting an investigation and closing the matter, and therefore the Foreign Ministry of Guyana decided to close the matter as well. That's my understanding of it when I read it. The second point I wish to make
Your understanding is that no one saw this video prior to us seeing this video.
No one knew about it. In fact, I think the president also said he was not aware of this video. So I don't know why this video surfaced only yesterday. What motivated whoever to put it out in the public domain. And the second point I wish to make is that the president said in this conversation with Charandas that he expressed regret and he accepted that he acted wrongly, and he himself decided the best thing for him to do is to return home as well. So both of them reached an understanding. So that's the mature part of Charandas, and that he recognized that he did something wrong and stupid. Any other points on this matter?
Yeah, one of the other things, well, my mama always tell me, don't knock a person when that person is done. So I don't want to sound like I'm knocking Charandas. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that's also, which is of concern, because now this has opened up, a whole lot of things we can look at. I am on his Facebook page, and one of the things he has been doing is he's been showcasing Guyana. I think Terry Gajraj was also in India. He has been to many of these cultural events, and I've seen him. He's gone to the Taj Mahal, and it's all well and nice. But from what I'm seeing, and maybe these things are all taking place at a level that we, the public, are not privy to, but I'm not getting a sense, that there are things happening here. I mean, between India and Guyana that would be of tremendous benefit for us. I mean, here's a country that, for Charandas, this is a country that where his ancestors came from, right? India is an emerging giant. It's placed in the category of countries like Indonesia, the United States, China, and so on, and it's going to grow. And for this to happen in a country like India, it is unfortunate. So my bottom line point here is that I wasn't getting a sense that to put it bluntly, it seemed like we had a high commissioner who was a tourist. And I'm not saying that's all he was, and I know there were probably things going on behind the scene, but I wasn't getting a sense that there was some serious policy decisions being made, between the two countries, and that's something I was looking for. So maybe that's there, but I don't know, and I didn't get that sense from looking at the Facebook. But I do wish him well. Like I said, I do agree what he did. Regarding the no confidence motion, he's a Barbitian like myself, so those things, it's unfortunate for him, I think.
Okay, anything else, gentlemen? So we'll just then move on to electoral reforms in Guyana, and I think the person who knows best about what this electoral reform is about and why we have electoral reform would be Ravi Dev. So I just call on him. He's a former parliamentarian. He's also a lawyer in Guyana, Mr. Ravindra Dev.
I keep on telling you, I'm a lawyer to the New York bar, and I've never been admitted.
Mr. Dev, can I just say one thing before you go? I do think, with all the stuff going on, I do think Mr. Bishran would make a very good High Commissioner to India. I'm just leaving that out there.
Gentlemen, I'm not.
I don't know if he's ever running.
I'm not campaigning for the job.
Coming back to this thing, basically, yesterday we had the government had a conclave at the convention center where, as they had promised, right after the August 2nd, when they acceded to office finally after 5 months in limbo, that they would try to correct the lacunae in the law that led to that debacle. And that is something that the government has attempted to be very, very careful in articulating, especially through the Attorney General, that what they're talking about specifically at this time is closing the loopholes in our law, the Representation of the People's Act, popularly known as ROPA, and also in the National Registration Act that is used to create a national register of registrants. So these changes are very limited. And right from the word go, we have a disagreement in Guyana, even on this limited focus on electoral change. The opposition, while accepting that there must be some changes to ROPA, the ones that were put out by the PPP doesn't satisfy them. They want a much broader ambit for change. So I think I want to put this in context, because we have been speaking on these programs for a long time, and the way I had presented it was that you can judge where we are as a country, where we are arguing more about procedures than policies. That really demonstrates our societal underdevelopment. Mature democracies talk more about the policies. How should we achieve this versus that? I have one set of policy to do it, you have another set. But in terms of the procedures, especially a basic one, like how do we run our elections? That's a fundamental threshold issue that should have been solved from the word go. Yet here we are, over 60 years, still arguing about it. And I want to, because this is the important point, this is what it's all about. This, what we're seeing here in terms of the electoral change and the disagreement over it, is merely, again, a symptom of that fundamental underlying dysfunction of us as a nation. Terence and I spoke 2 weeks ago about cricket. That while we may bash the British, they at least offered through cricket a notion that before we heard about game theory, the notion of through this game, if you follow the rules of the game, everyone can have an equal chance of winning at some point or other because you're playing according to the same set of rules. So once the umpire gives you out, you walk and you come back and you play your game. And when the other side is in the same predicament, you expect that the umpire will still rule in the same fashion. And it comes back to that is the essential disagreement we have in Guyana today. When I went to school, I learned of the distinction between brute facts versus institutional facts. Brute facts are those that, physics and chemistry can tell us, oh, that thing over there, that's a hedge. But it is institutional facts through a collective intentionality that we can say that hedge is a boundary. It's a hedge, but it's only a boundary if all of us agree that that hedge is this thing called boundary, and I simply can't jump over it, even though I can, to pick the mangoes inside of the hedge. You have to have that agreement, a collective agreement, and that is where we don't have today. So I want to just put that as a framework for us to discuss the specifics on what is being put on the table by the PPP, and as to how far that will go, and as to what the PNC and the opposition wants, and how can we now evaluate this too. So I'll throw it to my co-panelists to maybe take it from there, or even comment about what I said about the rules of the game.
Yeah, Professor Blackman, we just have about a minute before we go on a break. You want to make any points before we and then you'll come back.
So my essential point, which I will return to, is, as we've seen during the election of March 2nd, the point is the political crisis in Guyana is really not intractable. To credit of all of the stakeholders, especially sort of the voters themselves, the casting and counting of ballots on March 2 was conducted in a peaceful and a transparent manner. And really all that remained was for the count from each polling station to be accurately tabulated and declared. And it emerged then that there was evidence that suggested that this was not done in the case of Region 4, and then this led to a decision to recount the ballot for all 10 regions. Now, in a sense, I want to be clear about this question about the representation of the People's Act. It's a function of where you stand in this process. As I was preparing, I noted, October 6, 2015, the opposition PPP called for electoral reforms to be placed on the front burner, including a fresh voters list, improved biometrics, electronic voting, a new chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, and having refused to accept the results of the year's general election, the PPP said, they had been in power for 23 years and there were absolutely no reforms at GCOM. So this question of electoral reforms and how we do the representation, we have to be mindful that this is often where we're sitting, and when we're sitting in power or when we're sitting out of power. And so for me, the question is, is there some inclusive process by which we can all agree on the rules, as Ravi just pointed out, but do so in a manner that has some kind of consensus, so that what's happening at GCOM is not a 4-3 vote every single time that reflects sort of party lines. So that would be my setup for the discussion that we would want.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on a break and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Celebrating an anniversary, renewing your vows, birthdays, bachelor or bachelorette parties, groups or conferences, then let Globespan organize an all-inclusive vacation trip that suits your occasion. With 28 years of experience in the business, TravelSpan will tailor a package or cruise that suits all your needs for all occasions. Speak to our vacation experts and let them guide you. Call Russell or Allison to book your groups and special occasions, packages, or conferences. Call 212-243-0865. That's 212-243-0865.
Are you missing homemade food, snacks, drinks, roti and curries, or have a busy schedule? Then get your favorite curries and roti delivered directly to your home with all from one supplier. Come order your duck, goat, or chicken, fully cooked and ready to eat with dal puri or bus up shut. We also now have chicken tikka masala or lamb vindaloo available with regular naan or garlic naan. Don't forget to add your solo, icy, coconut water, or Nestle drinks to these delicious meals. Select your choice, and load your box and let allfromonesupplier.com deliver directly to your home. All from One Supplier has you covered for all your food. Plus if you need pepper sauce, curry powders, fish, meat, ghee, and so much more. We also have tasty pastries like pine tarts, cheese rolls, currants rolls, coconut rolls and so much more. Sales are ongoing every week, and your first order is 10% off once you apply the coupon code, Globespan 24x7. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com today and purchase. Allfromonesupplier.com is your one-stop shop for all West Indian items, and remember it's free shipping to all US states.
Take a trip this year to tour the beautiful Dubai and Abu Dhabi with TravelSpan. This package includes round trip with sights that are a beauty to behold. Visit the Dubai Golden City from views at the top of the Burj Khalifa, or tour Abu Dhabi and visit the Ferrari World theme park. Experience the desert safari with a barbecue dinner and belly dancing. And also have a Dow cruise dinner. Call in Guyana 227-1701, that's 227-1701, or in the United States 212-243-0865, that's 212-243-0865, and in Trinidad call 645-1604. Curry Roti Box has some of the best tasting meat and veggie curries. Here are some of the reviews from our customers.
Their food tastes amazing. I'm obsessed with it.
I ordered on Uber Eats and the food was so tasty. I had a bacon shark, doubles, and pepper chicken with chow mein. I hope you guys keep up the good work.
I called to order some doubles, chicken curry wrap, and dal puri. We found the food very tasty and will now have Curry Roti Box as our new local place for Caribbean food.
Curry Roti Box is located on 10306 on Liberty Avenue in Richmond Hill, New York. Order for pickup at curryrotibox.com or order delivery on Uber, DoorDash, and Grubhub. Try our tasty meats and veggie curries, plus roti, aloo pie, and doubles. Order on curryrotibox.com for pickup or again for delivery on Uber, DoorDash, and Grubhub.
So welcome back, viewers and listeners, to Globespan 24x7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh, with Mr. Devin D'Souza as our technical operator for tonight. We are discussing electoral reforms in Guyana. With us are three very distinguished panelists. Professor Terence Blackman of Medgar College of the University of New York, Professor Betram Ramarak of the State University of New York, and Mr. Ravindra Dev. Before the break, Professor Blackman was giving us a commentary on ROPA and electoral reforms in Guyana. You wish to finish up your point?
No. So one of the points that Ravi is making is kind of this distinction between procedures and policies, and sort of the PPP calling for, following the quote debacle, for sort of electoral changes that would close loopholes in ROPA. And what I'm pointing out to Ravi and to the other panelists is that in 2015, the PPP was calling for enhanced biometrics, electronic voting. They wanted to bring the GCOM Secretariat under the purview of the Commission to enable the Commission to give the Secretariat general orders and directions. They wanted recruitment of GCOM's key elections officials, such as the returning officers, the presiding officers, the poll clerks, through some improved, transparent, and impartial process They wanted a new voters list to be compiled on the basis of a fresh house-to-house enumeration. They wanted to review the process that allows for the voting by the disciplined services. They wanted to amend relevant sections of ROPA to allow for the enactment of appropriate legislation to facilitate the implementation of agreed upon reforms. They wanted the selection of a new chairman of GCOM. So part of the point I was making is that this was 2015 and this was the PPP as we talked about reforms in our electoral system. Many of these points that are now being are precisely the things that the APNU AFC are now asking for. And so in some sense, I think we have to come to the understanding that we can't have these very limited targeted solutions that Ravi would want to have in this context, because it's not the way that our politics has worked. And I think we, unless we come to some consensus about how we're doing our politics, then we're always going to be in this situation. When I'm out of power, I ask for these things. When I'm in power, I don't want to do these things. And so that's the point I wanted to lay on the table.
Professor Ramrat?
Well, I do want to be a little practical about this. So if we can kind of move away to, how do we get from here to there, right? For me, I would have to say that I'm not very optimistic given the way things are playing out and the way historically things have played out in Guyana. I'm not very optimistic in the sense that we're going to have a sort of a new political culture, whether it's based on constitutional change, which we're heading into, or, electoral reform, or whatever the case may be. I do believe that, well, I mean, we know, you can have all the laws in the books, right? I mean, we've had constitutions in Latin America, and every time there's a revolution, the new government that comes in, scrap that constitution and they rewrite it because you've had conflict, whether it's class conflicts throughout. So, and as Terence was saying, you're going to have a position taken by a party in the opposition, and the party in power will take a different position. And that has been the general, trend that we've seen. So there's a couple of things that that guides my position, that tells me that I should not be very optimistic. So I think the first one has to do with the whole notion of, this question of institutional memory. We've got a situation in Guyana where it is a deeply divided society. Generations have grown up under the situation, right? And it's very, very polarized, right? So you do have that, and that's been reinforced every time we have a discussion about whether it's GCOM, right? I mean, look at GCOM. I was in Globespan some time back, and I had Vincent Alexander and Robeson Ben, who were both, at that time, Ben was a member of the commission. And I had both of them to come to one agreement during that discussion, which is that they both agreed. They could not agree on anything else, but they did agree that, GCOM is sick. It needs fixing. And I think we all know that now, right? So you do have that polarization, because there is no way we can look at GCOM and say to ourselves, well, maybe the decision they make will surprise us. The expectation is that 3 people will be on one side and 3 on the other side. So my first reason for not being optimistic is this whole question of institutional memory, because each political party, have that memory that, hey, you were in power for so many years, you made these commitments to bring in biometrics and so on. Anil recently reminded us that when the PNC was in office, they also did the same thing. You had this paramountcy of the party, and every institution was governed by the PNC. So that memory will continue to divide us, right? So that's if one issue that I'm seeing is a major issue. Secondly, I do believe that for us to move beyond, and again, I'm saying you can have the best constitution in the world, but that's not going to solve our problem, right? Because if people don't accept, what the Constitution is intended to do, then we're not going to have changes. So it comes back to political power. So my second issue here has to do with political trust. Mr. Dev and myself have had discussion with someone from the Carter Center a while back, and we've talked about this whole discussion of trust. And the third one I will mention is this whole question of dialogue. So we don't have that political trust among candidates from both sides. And again, they both have institutional memory about what the other side did, when they were in power, and what the other side did when they were in office. So institutional memory, you've got the lack of this whole question of political trust, because it doesn't matter what the PPP does today, there will always be that, that suspicion. And of course, as I said, the whole question of dialogue, I would have to say that I don't see that visionary person in Guyana. I know President Ali is doing the best he can. We would like, hopefully, he can overcome this problem, where he can be that transformational leader, who can build trust among people on the other side. And what we would all like to see, I did interview Kit Nascimento last week, and piggybacking on the same point that he made in the letter that he just wrote, where we would like to be at a situation where, let's say, the PPP can make inroads into Mackenzie and Wismar, and the other side don't say, look, you're coming into my territory. We have to go beyond that. And if we can get to that stage, but again, my optimism, is not there. So the other thing I do want to say, which I think would be the real maker of any kind of change we would have to get out of this kind of morass we find ourselves in, which is the fourth thing, is we don't have a third force that can kind of guide and push the political leaders from both sides to a situation where they can say, look, we have a force here. 1992, we had the Carter Center, an outside force, came in to rescue us. The last election, the US and the entire world came in to rescue us from, descending into political anarchy, if you want to use that term, but it's certainly an undemocratic movement if, we didn't have the change that we had. So you had a third force, meaning an outside force that can play that role, right? The United States has played that role in Northern Ireland and other places, where you have that kind of movement, that push to get the leaders to come together, right? So we don't have that third force, and I think that has to come with agreement from all sides of the political spectrum, where they have to agree that, okay, we need some help. It's like the alcoholic, we need some help to address this problem. And I would say, I would add one more, comment to this, which is that I think the rank and file right now, the way Guyana is situated, I don't think it kind of caters to that situation unless we also have constitutional change. It's a combination of all of those things, right? We can't have coalition, before, but we should have it after, because we do have a situation where the two main political parties are not necessarily the two giants, who can win the election without, a chunk of votes coming from some other place. So that's a glimmer of hope. But the other things that I mentioned, we don't seem to have that. So therefore, I'm not very optimistic given the situation we're in now.
Mr. Ravidev, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, let me come back, and I want to remind my co-panelists that we are talking about electoral change. And it is a subset of the overall constitutional change that Mr. Nandalal has reminded us that they're going to put on the agenda next year. But they want to get a handle on the electoral mechanisms, the concrete electoral mechanisms that will be used for this upcoming local government elections. So all of the other changes that Dr. Ramarak alludes to will need legislative changes, and sometimes it will need almost certainly a 2/3 majority in the legislature. So that kind of horse trading is very time consuming, and they said they're putting it back in from next year, hopefully to get it in place for 2025. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But to come back to where we are on electoral reform, to tell you how far off we're sitting from this collective intentionality that we need so we can move on to talk about policies. You have to imagine that our Constitution is over 200 odd articles, which is about 10 times more than the American Constitution of 10 pages or so. But even more amazingly, we have to appreciate that ROPA, how we go about voting, how we go about registration, how we go about taking people off the list and all that, is 209 pages long. It means we thought, and I was part of that process in 2001 when I was in Parliament, we thought you had covered all the loopholes because there's been continuous changes since then. I participated, in terms of getting a new list that we had a rule of law march in which I participated in. And finally, in 2008, there was new registration. The point I want to make is that the complexity of ROPA meant that there was that mistrust. And when there is that mistrust because you feel the other side ain't going to be following those rules, you go into the extreme detail, piece by piece, as to what they ought to do. And yet you had this fiasco. To bring it to a point, I want to see how explicit this was. The rules for counting your vote. First, we had counting at the place of polling. Mr. Hoyt agreed to that in 1992. To make it more acceptable, it was then agreed to send all of the SOPs, right, to the region where there was a returning officer for each region. So there was a second, not counting of the votes, but all of the SOPs were summarized, and you had one total coming from each region. It was very clear as to the procedure. And the procedure, it says in ROPA that before at each SOP must be shown to all of the individuals in that room. You would think you can't get more explicit than that. Yet, with a straight face, you had the RO for Region 4 take those figures, put them in a spreadsheet, and didn't even deign to show the SOPs to those that are present. So if Beto Ram is a bit leery about constitutional change writ large, this is, I think it is even more a foregone conclusion that no matter how you change ROPA to cover every eventuality, and the new changes, the government put out their proposal, and there's two sets. One is 6 pages long, and one is 33 pages long. And I tell you, it's mind-numbing to go through them. But those who still don't agree on the ground rules will find a way to subvert it, even as bold-faced as not obeying the letter of the law. So I think coming back to what it is required in Guyana, I would like to propose this, that if the PPP is going to put constitutional change writ large on the national agenda, then all Guyanese ought to organize ourselves into groups at whatever level to use that as an opportunity to talk very frankly about the kind of Guyana we need and to reach some kind of consensus on that. We can't leave this to the politicians. The politicians are out to get power, and that's the nature of politics. How do you acquire power? And they'll acquire it by any means necessary. I would like to then say that the people in whom sovereignty lies, according to Article 1 of our Constitution, ought to take this opportunity next year to talk among each other as to what kind of Guyana we want, and to be able to come up with a system that the politicians are forced to accept. Over to you, gentlemen.
Professor Terence Blackman.
Well, so I think Ravi is beginning to move in a direction so I've been following some of the electoral reform group, and they, in some sense, they've sort of argued that, you know, it's some of the proposed amendments to the Representation of the People Act might not be the thing that we're looking for at this moment, but they've publicly called for, you know, time for consultations to generate some kind of, you know, inclusive consensus. You know, they see, you know, in a sense, what you need is, as Ravi's just described, a kind of widening of the space for all of us to come together and discuss what is needed, whether on ROPA or on the myriad of other issues that have emerged over the years. And I think this is, you know, what we have, as we've been describing, is a recipe for confrontation. And in the absence of some sort of inclusive process where you bring together stakeholders from the political parties, from the private sector, from the civil society to sort of think about the issue, then we're not going to come to that consensus. It's, you know, if you know, as Ravi notes, the PPP wants to, you know, close some loopholes. The question is, why close these loopholes and not other loopholes? And that will be the question that's sitting on the opposite side of the fence. And historically, we know that you know, it's precisely these sort of rule-based machinations that have disenfranchised one political party and the other. You know, like I said, I mean, up until some point in the process of the last election, you know, everyone could have been commended on doing something that, you know, did not seem to be problematic. And it was, at one point, the entire thing fell apart, right? And it fell apart because, you know, clearly some irregularities were engaged by people who held positions that were responsible for doing things in an appropriate manner. So if you have people who know all of the rules, who are in a moment of crisis willing to depart from the rule-making environment, then I think you have to reconsider how that works. And I think there's no way around that. At least for Guyana in this moment, there's no way around kind of having an inclusive process, which aims at no single party can do their 2 or 3 amendments and hope to have the kind of buy-in from the broad society that is necessary in order to make it work for the long run. And that I think is the point that I want to make.
Professor Ramrak?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, it seems like you guys are a little hopeful, which is good. That's a good place to start. You know, but we can't, I don't know how we can take the process away from the political leaders, right? Politicians control the scene, they make the laws, you know, they know the rules of the game, and they're the ones governing us. So it will take a tremendous effort to get there. And maybe there is hope in the sense that, you know, we can get organizations involved, right, in this process. Maybe we can get young people, but then we've got, you know, we've got a number of poll, because it does come back to, as Ravi said, you know, people have the power, right, to make that change. So maybe as, you know, as the country begin to progress more economically, people become more educated, maybe they may become more civic oriented, you know, more responsible. So that is a hope. So it certainly will require some kind of time and a process. But again, politicians will be there along the way. You're going to have politicians that challenge everything from here to thy kingdom come. You have the whole issue about procedure. You know, you have administrative issues to consider. You know, I mean, right now, take one issue, biometrics. You know, whether it's done through fingerprinting or facial features or movement, there's no agreement on that, right? And then you have, you know, if we're saying that we want to put this into the hands of the people and take it away from the politician, well, you've got the lap-up, poll that says that most people don't seem, at least young people, don't seem to be too politically connected, with the system. The International Republican Institute also, I did a survey. Even though it sounds like a lot of young people, don't trust the system, it seems like they're not willing to do much to change that. So it does come back to what I'm saying. It does come back to the politicians. You can't exclude them and you can't remove them. So my concluding point here is that it will take a tremendous effort to get to that point. I mean, when we talk about, civic organizations or business organizations out there, are you going to listen to what the Guyana Human Rights Association has proposed? This is an organization that doesn't have any credibility, for instance. So these are the kind of things that's going to come up, and the challenges are going to be there, and we're going to be going back and forth here and there, and it will continue. So I'm not seeing, and I'm not seeing that, that vision that you guys are maybe seeing, that, okay, well, we can cross, this bridge, and we're seeing some glimmer of hope. I think we're going to still have these challenges that we have right now, regardless of how, detailed, the laws might change, or how we change the Constitution. Maybe it might be different if we change the composition of GCOM, but you're going to have that challenge, and that process will continue along the way.
Professor Blackman, Rafidev?
Yeah, well, I just want to make a comment coming back to the notion of biometrics, that the difference between the two groups is so small, because right now we do have biometrics to register voters in registration. You have your fingerprint and you have that in a database there. What the opposition is calling for, the same biometrics in voter verification, when you vote, to verify that voting. So this is something which is, I'm saying, is that it is such a small divide there that they got to be some form of reciprocity in the system, so where you give and you take. And that is something where I think the opposition has done itself a disservice in going in all kinds of frolic and, as they say in law, in detour and frolic all over the place about apartheid and emerging apartheid state and all kinds of things, where I think it can make its case through a very simple thing like this biometrics, where people can understand you already have the fingerprint in the system, you already use it on your card, you already use it to be registered to check who you are. Why can't you go that extra step now to say, okay, in each of the polling station, you will have these very simple readers that can read your fingerprint. Every store has them. You can do that, and you go from there. So it's an example of where I think they got to be not pressure, but you got to have good campaigning to speak to the people. But Dr. Rambarak, I want to remind you that back in the 90s, the late 90s, it was a very small group called the Jaguar Committee for Democracy that put a reform of the disciplined forces on the agenda through its letter writing and through its, all the other forms of discourse that it went to the people directly. And it became part of the 2000 Constitution. And there was a disciplined force commission instituted that made the proposals that we had put forward, primarily that there should be some kind of representation of the population of the country in the armed forces. And today, I think that's a much wider accepted position. So I don't think we can give up hope. I think we just have to be creative to move the discourse out of the very specifics. Like, for example, right now you have, as the suggested change by the PPP, that, for example, I'm going to read this. This is verbatim from one of the things. ballots cast must be shown to counting agents. The number of ballot papers must be counted that are issued to presiding officers. The number of statements of polls forms to be issued must be counted. So it's like a mind-numbing detail that somebody's going to circumvent, because that's the whole point, that you're not talking about people accepting the spirit of the law, that man, you can't cheat. You just are looking into the letter of the law, and that will never ever. It has been shown throughout history that if you don't have people accepting the spirit and you depend on the letter of the law, you'll always have violations. So I want to come back to some of the other specifics that have been put on there, where I think you can reach some kind of consensus. For example, the removal of the dead. The opposition party said in the last elections you had dead people voting, meaning that people must have used their IDs and what have you to vote. Well, right now, both parties accept that the present law states that you can only be removed from the list if you have a death certificate shown to GCOM, and then GCOM will remove it. Now, even Anil accepted that only 90% of deaths you may have death certificate from. So how do you get around that 10%? I think as it was thrown back to the opposition party, well, exactly, give us a methodology to do that. The other big one with the opposition party is really planting their flag on is the bloated list, where we have about 750,000 people in Guyana, yet our voters list about 90-something percent, 650 or 60,000 people. So it's bloated. Now, all of us know that is because you can't take off those Guyanese who were registered in 2008. We're using the list from the last registration of 2008, cannot be updated because there's no agreement on it. And so those people who are abroad, we will never get their death certificate. How do we take them off? Because the court has ruled, because of the law that we have, that you cannot remove people from the list just because they are not residing in Guyana. So what I'm saying, there are some very specific issues that are on the cards that the opposition has to be more creative in bringing that out as to what is the way forward. When I was a member of parliament between up to 2006, there was this agreement that the two parties could get together and accept that we need a new voters list, a new registration, a new house-to-house registration. And that is how house-to-house registration was done in 2008. Now it's 10 years past. Why can't we have that same agreement between the two parties? Again, I am suggesting that the opposition who are outside, it is in their interest to raise these matters and raise it in a positive way so that it becomes, they did it in 2007. Why can't they do it again? We must go back to 2007 and see how it was done. What were the mechanics? There was a much more consensual undertaking at that time by Mr. Corbyn, and I think we need that at this point again. So I'll close with that to see if we can get some concrete proposal at this juncture to move forward.
Okay, so we don't have too much time left, so I'll just ask Professor Terence Blackman to make some final comments in response to Ravi and Professor Ramran.
So I wanted to go to the question. So America has a long history of dead people casting votes, right? We've seen the stories of John F. Kennedy winning Illinois in the 1960s with a quote cemetery block, right? But investigations have often revealed that the practice of dead people voting is sort of rare and often has a minuscule effect. But it's the sort of unfounded claims of the role of dead voters in the election that often kind of sparks confusion and makes it sort of difficult. So, I mean, for example, Donald Trump claimed that there were 5,000 dead voters in Georgia, and when they actually did an investigation, they found 4 cases of which involved the family of casting votes for deceased members of their family. 4, right? So I think what this is where I think we need to have some mechanism. I mean, how does one investigate whether or not, dead people cast votes in the election in Guyana? What's the mechanism for doing it? And in a sense, this is the maturity that we need at this moment. Ravi mentioned the biometric stance. So there's, one needs sort of biometric info in order to register as a voter. And the opposition is now sort of saying, well, when you vote, we want to see this, we want a kind of confirming biometric data at the point of voting. I mean, these are discussions that really have to be had, but they have to be had in a spirit where everyone is kind of moving towards some broad consensus in the game, right? It's clear, as Ravi notes. I mean, it's just mathematically, you can't have a list of eligible voters that almost tallies with your population, right? It makes no sense. So there must be some mechanism for dealing with that. And I come back to where I started. It's the political deadlock. If I'm in power and I just won, there's no incentive for me to do anything that could potentially affect my electoral majority. And this is why you need to have some broad countrywide consultation about here's how we're going to do business, so that citizens and stakeholders from the various sectors can be a part of that process. I don't think that this is a process that can emerge from just a negotiation between the APNU AFC and the PPPC. I don't think that the political maturity is there for this group of people to do the hard work that is that. There needs to be some force that comes from the outside and from the inside, and the force on the inside means that you have to engage the civil society, you have to engage the business sector, you have to engage the citizens in some broad consultation. This is the only way we get to that place. But these are not problems that are, like I said, in the American election in 2020, Donald Trump claimed that there were 5,000 dead voters in Georgia, right? So it's not, what's happening in Guyana is not dissimilar to what is happening across places across the world. The question is our response to what is happening and our ability to kind of have a reasoned, rational, consensual approach to governing ourselves, to exercising this self-governance. And that's the challenge for us. And Charles DeBoard. Sorry about that. We can put it onto the table and certainly be a part of it. I would say one thing though, as I think Professor Amnarak sort of has some degree of, I suppose, pessimism about what can occur here. I suppose I am cautiously optimistic. I think that our role in the world as it relates to an emerging energy power and the need for a certain kind of stability, in a sense, will force us to make some of these decisions that we have found so difficult to make over these many years. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we find a place to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, well, I know I sound, pessimistic, but I think listening to both of you, if the Guyanese people share those views, hopefully we can get over that, mountain. But I do believe that, we're dealing on the one hand with the sort of inertia, which really is something, that the politicians have created. So maybe there is hope in the sense that, you have a population that's going to be hopeful, and hopefully some of these things we've discussed, you can have broader agreement on, like biometrics would be something. Hopefully when you're doing your biometrics, if you're depending on your computer way out in the hinterland, your computer doesn't shut down because there's no electricity. So these are challenges. Something else that's being promoted by Anil is something that I think is also innovative, which does give you a sense of hope, which is that you want to break Region 4, for instance, into 4 districts, Region 2, and I believe Region 6 into 2 districts each. So maybe these are elements that's probably going to push us over that inertia, because initially when the plan was to break up Region 4, there was a big brouhaha. Well, you're trying to to control the political process, but if you're now saying, well, we can do this in an area where also Indians in the majority, let's say Region 6, then hopefully you can have that trust being built among political leaders, and hopefully civil forces and society can be able to push that, whether it's being done through the business community or Article 23 or whatever group that exists out there. But of course, hopefully social media can also be a force to push us into that direction. So we'll keep, as I say, hope alive, and hopefully you folks on the ground can be able to make those changes that we need, because we can't afford to have a continuously divided society every time we have an election.
Final words, Rafi Dev?
Well, my optimism, limited as it might be, comes out of very concrete factors. I was a member of the opposition 2001, 2006. We had gone into coalition with GAP, and GAP was in Parliament representing Roar. I had an input into that until 2011. And our prediction came to pass, which is that if and I argued men like Lincoln Lewis, David Hines, Takuma Ogunse, Eric Phillips, all of them, that if the opposition were to moderate its posture and its stance, that it's a changing Guyana in terms of its demographics. And lo and behold, as those of the Christian persuasion say, 2011 showed that it can work, and 2015 was its denouement. The point is that it's a new Guyana, but yet the opposition is playing a politics out of a past that is gone and dead. I put a lot of focus on the opposition because, as all of us agree, incumbents are not going to shake up the status quo. They're already in power, and they don't want to change anything. It's like a cricketer who doesn't want to change anything when he goes out to bat, and then the time when he had made that. PPP is going to be the one that doesn't want to change. So it's up to the opposition to up its game and to create an environment where the government will have to move. I saw this. I follow politics across the world, but one country that I'm particularly familiar with is Kenya. And I saw Kenya only as late as 2017. Elections precipitated riots where thousands were killed. Yet this last election, there was peace, and you had biometrics, and you had people accepting the votes. It shows you that if the opposition, in this case Mr. Ruto, took on 2 of his old competitors, Odinga, and also Uhuru Kenyatta, and defeated them because of the stance he took towards Kenya, a developing Kenya. He called himself a hustler. He represented the ordinary Kenyans and didn't talk fire and brimstone and bring up about who was killed and how many hundreds were killed, even though most of those killed was from his area. I think that we need to take an example there. And the last one to take an example there, they passed a law You will still have disagreements, electoral and otherwise. In Kenya, the law that was passed is to tell the courts that you have to decide on elections petitions within 15 days. They had an elections petition, the last election. It was decided within 15 days and it was accepted. So on that note, I claim that it can be done there and it can be done here. It all depends on the ingenuity of our people to sit down and really come together to accept, especially the opposition, that we need that collective intentionality where we agree on certain basics, and it's no shame to say, yes, we agree with the PPP, and the PPP has to say, yes, we agree with some things with the PNC, and we go forward. That's it.
I'm afraid that we have run out of time. That should be the last word. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule tonight to join us and share your views as panelists on electoral reform in Guyana. Thank you again. Good night, everyone. Thank you for watching or listening. Have a pleasant rest of the week and a great weekend coming up. Thank you. Good night.